Hello and welcome everyone to this virtual United for Libraries virtual Gala author tea. I'm Lauren Trujillo, 2026-2028 President of United for Libraries and Foundation Director of the Santa Barbara Public Library Foundation. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. For those of you who attended ALA conferences, you may have been to one of the United for Libraries author teas. They are a tradition going back 20 plus years. We are delighted to be able to bring this virtual event to such a wide audience. We'd like to thank our publishing supporters who are bringing these authors to us today: Penguin Random House, HarperCollins, W.W. Norton and Company, and Ingram Content Group. Today's author tea will feature Claire Boyles, Lisa Kleypas, Elizabeth Letts, and Eli McCann, and it will be moderated by Booklist Donna Seaman. We are in for a treat. Donna Seaman is editor-in-chief and adult book editor for Booklist, a recipient of the Louis Shores Award for Excellence in Book Reviewing, the James Friend Memorial Award for Literacy Criticism, and the Studs Terkel Humanities Service Award. Seaman is a member of the content leadership team for the American Writers Museum. Seaman's author interviews are collected in Writers on the Air, and she is the author of Identity Unknown, Rediscovering 7 American Women Artists and River of Books, A Life in Reading. Welcome, Donna.
Thank you so much, Lauren. And hi, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. I want to thank Beth, too, for all her work behind the scenes. I hope everyone's had a good conference so far. This is the big treat. As Lauren said, I'm with Booklist. I'm also part of the editorial team for our library patron magazine, Booklist Reader. I just want to mention that. Published each month, it's full of timely and timeless reading recommendations for all ages in print and audio books. Booklist Reader is available in its digital form for all Booklist subscribers. It's also a membership benefit for all of you who belong to ALA, but print subscriptions are for the public. It arrives in quantities of 20 or more for libraries to set out for free for their patrons. A library reader print subscription is an excellent gift for friends groups or library trustees or library foundations. I'm just saying, it's a wonderful thing. So much for that. I think Beth is going to post a link in chat for Booklist Reader if you're curious about it. You can learn more about it there. And now I'm going to introduce each author in turn. I encourage you to find the Q&A box on your toolbar and enter questions for the authors as you have them. Nice, succinct questions. And if you want to direct them to a specific author, that will be very helpful. And we'll do that at the end. So we're following the alphabet. Forgive my coughing. I have constant sinus trouble in Chicago here. I am so happy to introduce Claire Boyles. Claire is a writer, mom, former farmer, and professor of creative writing and the environment. She lives and writes in Colorado and Iowa. Winner of a Whiting Award in fiction, Claire is the author of Cite Fidelity, which won the 2022 High Plains Book Award for short stories. Cite Fidelity was also longlisted for the Penn Robert W. Bingham Award and the Reading the West Award. Claire's writing has appeared in VQR, Kenyon Review, Boulevard, and Masters Review. She was a Peter Taylor Fellow for the Kenyon Review Writing Workshops and has received support from the Kemmel Harding Nelson Foundation and the Breadloaf Orion Writers Workshop. Claire Boyles is also a screenwriter with multiple credits on Hallmark Christmas movies. And in addition to all that, she leads a farm and food community book club for a farmland preservation not-for-profit. We're gathered here today to hear about Claire Boyles' Appraisals, due out in August from W.W. Norton. The avid advance praise includes these remarks from Sarah Vogel, author of The Farmer's Lawyer. At once luminous, heartbreaking, and joyous, Appraisals is a gripping novel about a women-led organic farm in oil and gas country. Drawn from true life stories of economic oppression in rural America, this is a book for anyone who loves fresh vegetables and fruit, wants to prevent environmental collapse, and cares about family farmers. In Booklist, Bill Kelly writes, Boyles transforms the familiar architecture of the family saga into something more urgent and elemental, a meditation on land, inheritance, and the moral exhaustion of survival under capitalism. Set against the economic wreckage of the 2008 recession and the slow violence of ecological decline, the tale follows a Colorado farming family whose internal fractures mirror the exploitation of the landscape around them. Please welcome Claire Boyles.
Thank you, Donna. That was such a lovely introduction. And thank you. Hello, everyone from wherever you're tuning in. I'm so thrilled to be here. As a writer, of course, I'm a huge fan of libraries. And I'd love to talk a little bit about how this book came to be and actually the really pivotal role that libraries have played in my own development as a writer. The book is about a woman farmer who has a small vegetable farm operation. She sells at farmers markets and through a community-supported agriculture program. And that came from a lineage of female farmers in my family. I grew up until I was about 8 years old on my grandparents' fruit farm in northern Ohio. And my grandmother was really in charge of that farm. She was the main farmer. But she really never called herself a farmer. I really think she was also a Catholic mother of nine, and I think it felt a little bit to what she might have called woman's liber to have called herself, to have like taken on that role for herself. But she was the first woman I ever saw drive a tractor. And when my husband and I started our own small-scale vegetable farm in 2008, she and my grandpa gave us that tractor, a 1952 Alice Chalmers CA tricycle. So I don't know if you remember that movie Cars from Disney where they go out tractor tipping and they all kind of like go like that. That's sort of what our tractor looked like. We named her Alice, and she has a cameo in the novel, even though it's fiction. It's pretty heavily based on the farm that my husband and I ran in Colorado. That farm, we loved it so much. Our kids were 3 and 5 when we moved out there, and we grew vegetables and specialty cut flowers, and we raised chickens for meat and eggs, and we raised turkeys and pigs, and we built this really strong community of market customers and CSA customers and just people who really were committed to the environment and local food and good food and eating, which those were our people. But the housing crash in real life, the book has this. This is the one plot point that is drawn from real life. The setting is drawn from real life, and then this is the only plot point that is from true life. Is that the housing crash of the recession left us really far underwater on our mortgage, and we couldn't really access credit. So in 2013, we sold the farm at a loss, really kind of just before foreclosure and bankruptcy, which was for us in real life like a very public and a very painful failure. And that's sort of where this book was born. But what I want to really talk about for this crowd is how essential libraries were to our lives in rural Colorado. We were about between 15 and 20 miles from any the major city that was nearby, Greeley, Colorado, which luckily for us has a really strong library district. So shout out to the High Plains Library District in Weld County, Colorado. And we really relied as a family with small kids who lived in the middle of nowhere on their bookmobile services. So sometimes we'd order books ahead or the kids would order ahead, but the bookmobile would come to the post office in Gill, Colorado. The post office is still a functioning post office, and that's the only public building left in Gill, Colorado. There is a church and there is a school, but there are no longer institutions inhabiting those buildings, just like lots of rural America. And but a lot of times we would just browse, and the librarians were really good at refreshing the shelves and making sure there were interesting things. And they got to know my kids and me, actually. They really knew our tastes and would bring things they thought we would like. And they did that for all the families that came to the bookmobile. It was just a really essential service that the library provided to our rural community. And sometimes we would drive in to the library district had built this really nice library. And we would just sometimes go there because it was so just warm. There was a fireplace and it was comfortable and it was clean. We could just hang out there and kind of feel part of the wider world in a way that it was hard to do sometimes living out in the middle of nowhere. Um, and sort of in those last years of the farm when I knew there was kind of no hope. I had been writing a blog about the farm and I had been playing around. My brother was also an emerging writer at the time, and he and I had been sort of playing around writing scripts and TV pilots. And I sort of fell in love with fiction, but I didn't really know, I hadn't had a creative writing class for 15 years. I didn't really know what I was doing. So I checked out from the library 5 years worth of the Best American Short Stories anthology, and I read them all. And I wrote a short story and entered it in a very small contest for a local writers group, and it won. And I was not expecting that, but it was a real boost. It was the first time I really felt like writing could be something that I did. And, after the farm sort of failed, I went back and I got my MFA and I wrote my first book, my story collection, Site Fidelity, and that a version of that early story is in that book. Um, so I just want to really thank you all because I know you're here for many of you are librarians or you're involved with libraries, and I just want to say like the services that you provide to rural communities really matter to rural communities, and we're really, in my case, very individually impactful. I just really would not be here if it wasn't for access to that library and the ability to get those books. Um, and when Site Fidelity came out 5 years ago, I actually went back. I was no longer living in Greeley. It's about a half an hour from where I live now. And I went back to the Far Library, which is where we used to spend time. And when I saw it on the shelves in that particular library in Greeley, I really had a really emotional moment and kind of started crying a little bit. Just felt really so grateful for the support that the library had given to me and my family through a really hard time, but also through like this transition from having been a farmer to now being a writer. So thank you all so much for having me. I can't wait to hear. I feel really lucky to be here with all these amazing writers, and I can't wait to hear their stories. And I think I'll turn this back over to Donna.
Thank you so much, Claire. That was wonderful. Always love hearing library stories. And now I'm feeling very moved. All right, next up is Lisa Kleypas. I know many of you know Lisa's work. Readers love Lisa's superbly well-crafted, nuanced, insightful, and sublimely enrapturing historical romances, including her Bow Street Runner series, the Wallflower series, Victoria Ravenel novels. Lisa has also written cherished, emotionally nourishing, and richly rewarding contemporary romances. Now she has ventured into new territory, historical fiction. Her new novel is Queen of Lombard Street. It's set for an October release from Avon Books, an imprint of Harper & Collins. Best-selling Kate Quinn says this novel, which stars a trailblazing woman economist in 1870s London, is written with panache, and it is an absolute delight. Booklist notes that Kleypas deftly touches on many social issues in this richly detailed and compelling story of the first woman banker in England, who was also a radical reformer, concluded that fans of gal boss love stories will want to pick up perennially best-selling Kleypas's latest. And Julia Quinn, another very popular writer, says Lisa is the rare author who can make you laugh and cry on the same page. Here to tell us more about this fascinating historical tale is Lisa Kleypas.
Thank you so much. Hope everyone can see me. I am so happy to be here, and this is very meaningful to me because I am here because of libraries. They shaped who I am now. They really rescued my childhood. I'm of that generation that we were all latchkey kids, and we did not have a lot of money for books. So we lived in a little four-square house in Watertown, Massachusetts, and it was about a 10-minute walk to the local library from our house. And so I got a library card when I was about 8. And then I started making that trip back and forth to the library, just clearing off a shelf at a time, bringing it back to home and then bring it back to the library. And it was wonderful. I mean, it was magical. And it's because of my love of books and my relationships with the librarians that I eventually became a writer. So for decades now, I've written historical romances, tried a few other things, and it got to a point after the very last book that I had published that I wanted to not have to focus so tightly on the love story that it would preclude exploring different things. I wanted to have the freedom to go on and explore new themes and ideas and really draw back the camera, so to speak, so that you could get a larger view of the world. So the thing that I started out with, the basic idea was that instead of doing a self-made hero, which I had done in my historical romances for so long, I wanted to do it with a female character, with a woman who starts out with nothing, becomes extraordinarily accomplished and successful, but not because she got married, not because she inherited anything, but just using, her own wits and her own skills. And so I sat down and I started to research what professions would a woman be able to do that plausibly? Like which things would allow a woman to have those opportunities? So I looked and I looked and I looked, and it was shocking. I mean, there was nothing. You had real life women that I researched, like Eliza Orme, who audited classes and law classes, studied, aced the examinations. So she was as talented and as good as any guy who had graduated from law school. And she graduated, and they wouldn't call her to the bar because, they said that the Inns of Court said, well, no, we just don't do that for women. Elizabeth Garrett Anderson became the first female doctor in England, licensed and certified. But as soon as she did, because she'd managed to slip through some loopholes, they closed all those loopholes. So women couldn't do it in medicine either. Surprisingly, the one area that I found where it was possible, and it was done by some women, was the area of finance. Now I'm terrible at finance and economics and all that. It's just not one of my things. But the thing about it that was so compelling was that unlike all the other professions, money doesn't care. Money will behave the same way, whether it's in the hands of a man or a woman. So women had opportunities then. There were still a few obstacles, but it was a strong possibility for her. And the more I researched, the more I realized if you have the restrictions that women had back then, and you don't have economic power, you can't keep your own money, you're not legally allowed to open your own bank account. Nothing else matters, really. I mean, even having the vote doesn't matter if they keep you restricted to that extent. So I started to think of it not like women had a glass ceiling back then, but they almost had like a glass box where they kept you in place. In fact, you literally didn't even have the freedom to move around society a lot. So I created this character of Reina Martin, and she is the illegitimate child of a Spanish dancer and an English banker. And so when you are illegitimate back in that time, you don't legally exist. I mean, you are not recognized legally to have rights. It is a strange non-person sort of identity. So that's starting at the bottom. The one thing she had going for her was that her mother subscribes her to a lending library. And back then they had a subscription service where they would bring books to you and then you read them and then they take them back. And so when you're isolated the way Reina Martin is, that gives you a view of the world you wouldn't have any other way. On top of that, her mother starts hiring tutors for her because her mother doesn't want her to be forced into the same life that she has. And Reina's dream is that she wants to start an all women's bank. She becomes very accomplished in finance. She writes a finance advice book for women, and she has some money from the royalties of that. So she goes to a bank, wants to open an account for herself. She can't because she's a woman. And so her goal from then on is, I want to open an all-women's bank so that other women can have opportunity to have control over their own futures. So she partners with her mentor named William Farlow. He's going to help her establish it. She becomes very successful through investing in finance, and she hires a household staff of paroled convicts to help her. So they're all outcasts. They're all people that society doesn't see and doesn't want there. And she also happens to discover at some point that her butler is an undercover detective, and he is investigating William Farlow and possibly her as well for massive fraud. So the book is about Raina still trying to pursue her dream, helping with the investigation, and falling in love. And the reason that I wanted to include that, it's deliberate, because I didn't really have to include the love story, except the butler was pretty hot. And I thought, it's my personal belief that women back then and now, it seems like everyone's trying to put us into categories and trying to say, well, you're either a career woman, or you want to be a wife and mom, or you're a serious person, or you're a frivolous person. And it's my personal experience that motherhood and work, they weren't necessarily, convenient for each other, but at the same time, they actually sort of made each other better. So I felt like it was important to show a character who wasn't just like extraordinary woman of her time who's so special and great, and therefore, yay if she gets ahead, but the rest of us don't. Like she wants to help all of us. She wants to have a dimensional life, and she's working for other women to have a dimensional life too. So this book ended up being an unusual combination, in that I think it ended up being a historical fiction novel, but it has a romance in there as well. So it's not an easy book to put in some sort of default category, but it's not easy for any of us to be put into a default category either. We're women, we deserve support, and we deserve to design our lives the way we want to. So that was a big message from the book. And the other one is really that as this community of outcasts support each other, come to really love each other, it's important to remember that no one is exactly who you think they are. No one is frozen at one moment in their life and can't ever become something else. I think we tend to look at each other in more limited ways than we should. So there's a lot in this book, and I hope you enjoy it. And I'm glad to be here to tell you all about it. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. You've given us a lot to think about. Really enjoyed hearing about Queen of Lombard Street. On to our next author, Elizabeth Letts. Elizabeth Letts writes for adults and kids, and many of her books are about horses and horse people, a theme linked to her experiences as a teen equestrian in Southern California. Elizabeth's best-selling nonfiction includes The $80 Champion, Snowman, The Horse That Inspired a Nation, and Ride of Her Life, the true story of a woman, her horse, and their last chance journey across America, in which Elizabeth tells a remarkable story of Annie Wilkins, who at age 63, following a dire health prognosis, traveled cross-country, this was in 1954, on horseback with her dog, determined to see the Pacific Ocean. Booklist describes Letts' chronicle of Wilkins' remarkable adventures as upbeat and touching. Elizabeth's books have been selected for One Book, One Community programs at libraries and organizations across the country. She has received the PEN Award and the Middle East Book Prize, among others, and her books have been selected as Indie Next and Library Read Selection. Elizabeth's 6 novels include Finding Dorothy, a fictional portrait of Maud Gage Baum, wife of L. Frank Baum of Wizard of Oz fame, And the book you'll be hearing about today, her newest novel, which draws on her love for horses and, excuse me, her services in the Peace Corps in Morocco. This novel is Fallen for France, and it is due out in August from Ballantine Books, an imprint of Penguin Random House. Set during the First World War, it stars a magnificent horse from Morocco who ends up in France, where this mare connects a group of disparate people. Booklist says, let's imbue her microcosm of the Great War with detailed sensory descriptions and multiple perspectives that lend varying degrees of sympathy to each character. And she offers a satisfying closure with a glimpse into the decades beyond the novel's end. And Susan Meisner, author of A Map to Paradise, says, Letts is a spectacularly talented storyteller and wordsmith. Fallen for France has everything: wartime intrigue, exotic locations, and beautifully flawed characters. Prepare to be swept away. It is my great pleasure to introduce Elizabeth Letts.
Hello, everybody. I'm so thrilled to be part of this group today, and I am a fellow library lover with everybody else. Love libraries, but I want to say that Donna mentioned that I've done a lot of these community one read programs, particularly in the last few years, and particularly for my book, The Ride of Her Life, which has brought me into a lot of libraries and a lot of different communities. And boy, what an eye opener, ladies and gentlemen, you librarians out there, because I was a little antiquated in my view. And I had no idea the extent to which libraries are, I don't know, everything places at this point. And I have seen 3D printing rooms, and I have seen youth rooms with advanced audiovisual equipment for young creators to use. And I have seen libraries that double as food pantries and closets and all kinds of different things. And I do want to share one story. Recently, I was invited to give a talk at a library's 125th anniversary down in Fairhope, Alabama. And the subject of my talk was my life in 10 libraries, which turned up to be one of the most fun talks that I've ever given, because I had to kind of go through my life and think about what different libraries had meant to me at different times. But I ended with a story from one of these community one reads, and I was invited to a community out in Kansas, where it was more of a, I wouldn't want to say it was a rural community or suburban. It was kind of like a medium-sized town. And they put me up in a big concert hall, and they had a great turnout for this talk. I was talking about Finding Dorothy, about the Wizard of Oz. And there was a gentleman who was with another gentleman in a wheelchair, and they were waiting till the very, very, very end of the talk. And people usually, when they wait to the very, very end of the line, is because they have something they want to tell you. And I didn't really know what it was about. But this young man, he looked very nervous, and he waited and he waited and he waited. And he finally kind of shyly asked if I'll sign this book. And the library had purchased the books to distribute. So it was great. I signed his book. I had a very quick chat with him. He told me he loved The Wizard of Oz and that he had really enjoyed my talk. Well, afterwards, the librarian told me something which really stuck with me. And she said that this man who had waited all the way to the end of the line was a frequent patron of the library, but they had never seen him come. He came to, whenever they had sponsored talks, he would come and eat, and then he would leave. And they said that they had never seen him stay to hear the talk, and then they had never seen him ask for a book. And it was probably because he loved The Wizard of Oz, but it was such a wonderful idea that I thought that this librarian had been supporting this man all this year, and giving him food and giving him company and giving him apparently a warm place to stay and different things like that. And eventually something had caught his attention, and he decided to stay and take a book. And that meant a lot to me. So I wanted to share that with you. And now I'm going to pivot to tell you a little bit about my new book, Fallen for France, which is a novel. And I want to talk a little bit about how it is that Elizabeth Letts, who is known for writing Americana and books about horses, ended up writing a book that is largely set in Morocco. I really surprised myself when I wrote this book, but there is a backstory behind it. And the backstory is that right out of college, I joined the Peace Corps. And I was sent to Morocco to teach English in a high school. I was in southern Morocco. And actually, when I went there, and I was 21 years old, I thought I was going to find something to write about. That was my idea. Like, I'm 21, I want to write books, but I don't know anything. So I got to go somewhere so I can know something. I went to Morocco, and as a Peace Corps volunteer, they send you out into a town and they teach you the language, and you work in the local community, and I didn't write anything. I mean, I did, it was a long time ago, so I wrote a lot of letters home on airmail stationery, and I kept a journal, a diary. But writing something about Morocco seemed completely beyond me. I didn't even consider it. But what did happen when I was in Morocco was at that same high school, I met my future husband, who was a Moroccan, originally from the High Atlas Mountains, who had grown up in circumstances wildly, wildly different from mine. I'm from Los Angeles, and I grew up with a heated swimming pool in my backyard, riding horses. I was a horse girl. My husband grew up in a agrarian village that did not yet have running water, electricity. It didn't have paved roads to it. It didn't have unpaved roads, really. I mean, the paths. His mother, both of his parents were illiterate. His mother carried kindling on her back. His father farmed in just this kind of very ancient way that they farmed in the mountains of Morocco. And well, I mean, that didn't stop us from falling in love and getting married, and we went on with our lives and eventually moved to the United States. And I started writing this book, Fallen for France, about a beautiful Arabian mare who was found in France on the Western Front. And this was based on something I had read, an English veterinarian writing about finding an Arabian horse on the Western Front. So I started writing the story, and this has never happened to me before, but they talk about when a character will just gallop away with the story, and you end up writing a book that you didn't think you were going to. And I was writing this book, and it was all set in France, and I got to about page 200 of the first draft, and this boy is born. And the boy is born way up in the mountains and looks suspiciously like my husband looked as a child, very handsome with black hair and big white teeth and a big smile and very intelligent. And so I really surprised myself. I didn't know that that's what I was writing about. Fallen for France is a story about a boy who's born in the High Atlas Mountains in a remote village in the beginning of the 19th century. And at the age of 6, he's sent away to work as an indentured shepherd. His mother gives him her most precious possession, which is a string of 6 amber beads, just hoping that somehow those beads will help him to find his way home. And when he goes off, that same day, a beautiful Arabian mare is born in the Sultan's palace, and the horse is born under this omen. Groom believes that she's sent for great things. These two seem like they would never meet, but their paths end up crossing. And then for a moment, there's this, boy and horse love story. The horse loves the boy and the boy loves the horse, and it's all magical and golden. And then the horse is stolen by a soldier and ends up in France during the Great War. Well, the horse begins to change hands from hand to hand. She goes to a beautiful French nurse, and then she ends up with an English veterinarian. And all the while, the boy is searching for his horse and for the soldier who stole her. And he ends up in France as well. And this is one of those stories. And, I love to read them. And so I finally decided I was going to try to write one where all these different characters feel like they have nothing in common. And you see their lives and you see them sort of slowly and inexorably getting closer and closer together until eventually it turns out that their stories are all interlocking. And what interlocks them is the force of the war itself. Because what I discovered in writing this book that I really did not know was that the First World War, World War I, was not just a European war. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers from the colonies of England and France, including soldiers from Morocco, did serve in the war. And so, in a lot of ways, this story, Fallen for France, is also a story about memory. Why did we not remember that? Why didn't we know as much, or why didn't I know as much about World War I as I should have, which I'd always thought of as being purely European? And an attempt to bring back that memory and to recognize the service of those soldiers, which for many and complicated reasons were mostly erased and forgotten by both sides, the Moroccans and the French. And so that is Fallen for France. That is my story.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. That was deep in thought about your feelings about the World War I. Thank you so much for telling us about Fallen in France. We'll talk some more about this after our fourth presentation. We are going to welcome Eli McCann to the screen. Eli is a first-time novelist. He is a writer, a podcaster, and a lawyer. In his award-winning monthly humor column for the Salt Lake Tribune, Eli writes about growing up with and leaving behind the Mormon faith, coming out in adulthood, and parenting a toddler. He co-hosts Strangerville, a storytelling podcast and live show, and his work has been featured in the Washington Post, Newsweek, HuffPost, and the BBC. Eli's columns have been collected in a book with a really funny title, We're Thankful for the Moisture, A Gay Guy's Guide to Mormon Faith, Family, and Fruit Preservation. It was published earlier this year. Best-selling author Gabrielle Blair writes, it's hilarious, poignant, heartwarming, heartbreaking, and universal. Eli McCann captures the experience of a Mormon upbringing, married life with his husband in Utah, and what it was like to exit his religion, all with clear-eyed honesty, insight, tenderness, and scar tissue. And now, Eli brings his gift for comedy, his deep insights and storytelling skills to Stitched, a novel about competitive quilting, unlikely friendships, and found family. It's a September release from Torrey House, distributed by Ingram. And according to Kirkus, Stitched is bursting at the seams with humor and genuinely tender, touching moments. Writer and columnist Dan Savage says, McCann is the single best gay, married, ex-Mormon dad writing a humor column in America today. Scratch that. He's the best humor columnist we've got, period. And this, his first novel, is a delight. And a quote from the Booklist review, McCann's debut novel is a warm-hearted slice of life tale that perfectly captures its characters as their voices alternate in the telling. From worried Betty Lou to churlish Lyra to flamboyant Byron. If Jan Karen's Mitford novels had a slight edge, they would be this quiet joy of a novel. I'm delighted to welcome Eli McCann to the screen.
Hello, and thank you so much for having me. I am so thrilled to be here, and I echo the comments about the importance of libraries in our communities and our lives. I have a toddler right now. He's about to turn 2, and our adorable local library down the street from my house has been a godsend for us. And so I really appreciate all the work our libraries do in our communities across the world. I had never really intended to write a novel. I've been a humor columnist for a number of years, and I've written a lot of humor essays over the years that have been published in various places. And I just sort of thought that's what I want to do with the rest of my life, is write humor essays from my life. Well, a few years ago, it was 2022, I had just finished a triathlon, and my husband and I went to dinner with my parents after this triathlon. I was completely exhausted. And we sat down at the dinner table with my two parents. There was a lull in the conversation. And suddenly my mother leaned forward to all of us and said, there is a lot of drama going on in the quilting community right now. And we just sort of looked at her like, what is she talking about? And then she said, especially the Australians. And then she took a sip of her Diet Coke and sat back in her chair, just like waiting for us to ask questions. And we had a lot of questions. And my mother has been a quilter basically her entire life, and she's been in a quilting group of other women for over 40 years. These women have quilted together, and their quilting group is called Common Threads. And I just sort of grew up under a quilt frame. There was always a quilt in our house, and there were always women in our house sitting around this quilt frame, quilting, hand quilting, and preparing quilts for competitions and for shows and so forth. And they are exceptionally talented quilters who take the craft incredibly seriously. And their relationships with one another are, old and tight, and they're defensive of one another. And so that night, sitting around the dinner table with my parents, my mom, for the next 2 hours, then just dished all of this gossip about the quilting world. And we asked so many questions. It was truly riveting. And she talked about, different groups getting along with other groups or not getting along with other groups, and people being very territorial about their process in making a quilt, not as willing to share their process with others because of the competitive aspect of competitive quilting. She talked to us about quilting groups that had been disqualified from shows or competitions because they had cheated, which was something I did not know you could do. And when we left dinner that night, we got into the car, and my husband turned to me, my husband Skylar, and he said, "You have to write a book about this." And I said, "Write a book about what?" And he said, "About quilting." And I said, "Well, I'm not a quilter. I'm not an expert on quilting. I've sort of passively observed it my entire life, but I'm not an expert on it." And I said, I wouldn't be qualified to write a book about quilting. And he said, "No, I think you need to write a novel about a group of older women quilting together and about their relationships and about what that looks like." And I told him what I told you all when I started this story. Had never intended to write a novel. I didn't want to write a novel. So I said, "Oh, I'm not a novelist. I write personal humor essays." And he said, No, Eli, I think this is really good material." And so we ended up going home that night, and we ended up staying up late. And the two of us kind of talked about this story and what would the story even look like. And we mapped out some characters, and we mapped out a story until like 1 o'clock in the morning. And by the time we finished that, I thought, "Oh, that is a really fun book. That would be a really interesting and fun book. I hope someone writes that." And then we went to bed, And over the next couple of months, it just sort of brewed in my brain, and I just kept thinking about it over and over again. And I finally, one day, it was a Saturday morning, I decided I'm going to sit down. I'm going to write like one chapter of this thing just to see how it feels. And so I wrote a chapter of this book. And I gave it to my husband. I said, "Read this and tell me if this is even worth pursuing. Is this good at all?" And so he took it into another room, and he sat down with it and read it in critical silence. And when he finished reading the chapter, he came back into the room, and he had tears in his eyes. And he said, "This first chapter made me laugh out loud multiple times, and it made me cry twice. And you have to finish this book." And so after that, I just thought, okay, I think I have to finish a novel now. I think I have to finish this book. And so over the next year and a half, I started attending quilting night with my mom and her friends. Their quilting group is harder to get into than the Illuminati, so it was really amazing that they let me visit at all. But I started visiting her quilting group and observing them and asking them questions about the quilting itself, and competitions and shows and how does it work. And I observed the way they interacted with one another, these women who have been quilting together for decades, and now they're all in their 70s, 80s, and 90s, and they've been quilting together for decades. And I ended up writing this book, Stitched, and the story follows a group of 6 older women in their 60s, 70s, and 80s who have been quilting together for decades, and they are preparing for a competition against their bitter rival group, which is another group of women in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. And in the process of doing this, their numbers have dwindled because people have kind of aged out of this group or have moved away. They end up recruiting 2 younger gay men to join their quilting group, and they have a year to teach them how to quilt, how to prepare for this competition, and enter their quilt into a competition 1 year later. And so the story follows them preparing for this competition and interacting with one another and teaching one another. And it explores and examines the relationships of these women and the personal problems that they're dealing with, and the problems that they're dealing with as it comes to, aging and becoming a woman who is aging in this world and feeling largely ignored or sidelined and laughed at for a hobby that they're taking incredibly seriously, that matters a lot to them, that a lot of people think feels a little bit silly or whatever else to take so seriously. And it was a true joy to write this book. I had such an interesting experience with the publication of this book because when I finished the manuscript, I was very happy with it. I was proud of it, and I was able to say the thing that I think a lot of authors would like to say when they finish writing a book, which is, this is a book that I want to read. And so I was really happy. I had written a book that I was like, I would read this book. I like, this is a book that I want to read. And so my literary agent and I started pitching it to publishers across the country. And we kept getting the same feedback over and over again from publishers. And that was, we really like the story. We really like the tone. We like the humor. We like, the voice of the book. We are worried from a marketing perspective that it will be difficult for us to market a book about older women. Would Eli be willing to rewrite it and write these women to be in their 30s and write romance into it and that sort of thing? And I just kept saying, no, that's not the book I wanted to write. This book was a love letter to my mom and her friends, and I wanted to write a book about older women quilting together. And so I just kept pushing it and pushing it and pushing it, and it was getting so discouraging. And I finally found the publisher that I ended up working with, Torrey House Press, who just completely got it. And I said throughout this process, I feel like that feedback is so wrong. I know people would want to read a book about older women quilting. I knew it in my core. I know, and I kept saying over and over again, I know I can sell this book. All I have to do is tell people what it's about, and people will be intrigued and interested in reading this. And so the Stitched comes out on September 8th. And so for the past couple of months, I've been promoting it and talking about it online. And it has been so validating and gratifying to see just an overwhelming amount of interest and excitement and support for this book that is about older women quilting. When I wrote the book, it was really important to me. I wanted the book to be funny, and I wanted it to have heart. But it is a humor novel. It's a humor book, but I never wanted the joke to be that at the expense of older women. I never wanted the joke to be at the expense of quilters. I wanted the book to be funny because I wanted the women to be funny, because these are people whose lives are worth examining. And as I sat with my mom and her friends over the course of a year in their quilting nights, I was genuinely delighted by these women because they're hilarious, and their lives are so full and so rich, and their histories are so interesting. And it was really, really important to me to try and capture that in the story of Stitch, that this is a book worth reading, and because it's about a type of person that is worth reading about and investing in. And so I am just so excited for this book to come out in September, and so excited, and hope that you will all love it.
Thank you so much, Eli. What a great story. And I love everyone's comments. Everyone's so supportive. So you've all been having such a good time. You haven't put any official questions in the chat or the Q&A. So we have some minutes left. So I will ask some questions. I'd like to invite all four authors to join me here on the screen. They can turn your cameras on and unmute yourselves. That would be great. There's Claire. Yay. Hi, those were all wonderful. And we're waiting for Elizabeth. Very moving, and many things went through my mind. Oh, there's Elizabeth. Hi. Yes. So I'm very struck by how hard everyone works to make novels authentic. Fiction is story, and we want to be transported, but you all work really hard to write novels of depth that are based in fact and genuine feelings and authentic experiences. And you have a mission. Each of you had a mission in the novels we were talking about today, whether it was to talk about farms, women in the 19th century that had zero rights, a war we still don't really understand, or attitudes towards older women. And I'm wondering, I guess my question for all of you is, and we'll go in the same order that you spoke previously, is how do you balance the idea of a message, a mission, with the art of storytelling, the captivating aspects, so that it's not a polemic, so that it is in fact a work of literature? Claire, let's start with you.
Revision. I think my first drafts are pretty heavy-handed, and then I work really hard to try to go back to what I think is really interesting about fiction, and especially climate fiction, is like how it can reflect how people feel, like the way these external pressures of these, whether it's a river dying or whatever is happening, like how that affects our relationship with ourselves and our families and our communities, and those dramas between the people that surround these sort of bigger issues are usually, they take me a little longer to get to, but that's kind of how I try to get to the heart of a book.
Yes, and that's what makes it. You can read a lot of news stories, and they can affect you, but it's that human element that, when it comes right down to your family and you. Lisa, how about you?
Well, the more that I research, and especially with this particular book, when you get into the actual lives that women had and their challenges and their joys, and um, they become so real to you that it set me on fire. Like I was like, any one of these women that I'm reading that lived, a century or more ago, I could sit down and converse, totally understand her. She would have great advice for me. And so I wanted to convey that. And I think if you get really into research and make the world real for yourself, then it'll come across on the page. And so yeah, and then overall just having the focus of community and empowerment. So I felt like if you can keep that in mind, it shapes everything that you're doing in the book.
Yes, exactly. Elizabeth, you took on a lot of complicated things in Fallen for France. I think you're muted. Yeah.
There we go.
There we go.
Yes. I think in my case, I mean, the story's just, um, I start with story. Something will happen that will just catch my attention. In this case, it was reading this account by an English veterinarian talking about finding this Arabian mare, and it just kicks around my head for sometimes for years. I mean, literally just sometimes for years. And then the story kind of grows around it, and then I start writing drafts, and I'm not a planner at all. So it's like every draft, I'm sort of layering things on without really knowing what I'm layering on. And I have no idea. I did not know I was writing a book about forgotten soldiers in colonial war of first war when I started and probably yourself. It takes me forever to figure what my how did an Arabian horse from Morocco get to France? And then you start to research. And that's it. So I would say like for me, I'm not polemical at all. And I do hope eventually, I don't really know what my books are about until readers tell me. That is the God's honest truth. And I just did a book club. My book's not out yet, but I just did do a book club with the book to see what readers were going to say with like a beta book club. And I had this really interesting experience where one of the people reading the book was an English professor. And so he starts talking about this beautiful Arabian, and he says the violence of colonialism was enacted upon the body of the horse. And I'm going like, wow. But the woman sitting next to him, she said, well, I really love horses, and I just thought it was a horse. So I don't know. It's a mystery. It's the mystery of it all, how it all comes out, I guess.
Amazing. Eli, you kind of talked about what motivated your book, but in the actual writing of it, what were the big challenges for you?
Oh, I mean, many. There were many. I mean, to kind of address the broader question, I have thought for a long time that storytelling is the best and most effective form of advocacy. And so, if you want to advocate for something, for some kind of principle or whatever, the best way to do that is to tell a story really well. And I think I have approached writing from a humor essayist perspective in that way, especially if I'm writing about issues that are really important to me, like LGBTQ rights, which are very important to my family. I have found that when I write a compelling story about my life with my husband and our child, that's way more effective than telling people, you should believe XYZ. And I think something that I'm learning with this novel right now, where this is something that I've invented in my head completely, a story that I've invented in my head, is I'm having to remind myself that I wrote a story that I found interesting about people that I find interesting. And I need to take a step back and allow, to Elizabeth's point just a minute ago, allow people to have their own interpretation, whatever that looks like. And I think that's going to be that was a challenge in the writing process, to say I'm just going to tell the story that I want to tell and let it be what it is. And I think it's going to be really interesting for me as a first time novelist to say, okay, and some people are going to have a completely different interpretation or feeling about this story that I wrote than I do. Some people might hate it, and that might be kind of hard for me to hear. And some people might love it for a completely different reason than I love it. And that's what art is. And any art worth examining should have an array of opinions.
Yeah, so true. So true. And there's a lot of comments in the chat hoping that you're all going on tour with your book. So that's great. And also, don't forget, libraries can do virtual events with authors. So I guess in the few minutes we have left, like to do one more round. And I'm just really curious about who some of your favorite authors are, who you read, if anyone particularly inspired your most recent book, or if there's just some, sort of pole stars for you, other writers. Claire, start with you.
One of my formative texts is a short story collection called Cowboys and East Indians by a woman who is now actually a good friend of mine, but I fell in love with her work before I ever met her, Nina McConaughey. And it had gone out of print, but it's been reissued along with her novel, How to Commit a Post-Colonial Murder, which came out earlier this year. And yeah, I would really recommend both those books. There are others, of course, but I think all of us could just go on and on. So I'll leave it there. I think Cowboys and East Indians is really one of my favorite story collections that I've ever read.
That's great. Thank you. Lisa, how about you?
I'm just indiscriminate. I read everyone and everything. So I love, John Green, Catherine Stockett, Kate Quinn, E.M. Forster. There's this wonderful collection of short stories Melissa Bank wrote. Unfortunately, I think she passed away, but it's called The Girl's Guide to Hunting and Fishing, something like that. That was amazing.
Yeah.
Sally Rooney, I just read her for the first time, Normal People, blown away, thought it was amazing. I can never write like that because it's so perfectly spare and she chooses her words so well. And I'm just like, I love to really get elaborate and detailed, but it's fun to read someone who's good at the opposite thing. So yeah, I love reading.
Great. I love to hear. Yeah, you're not going to write if you don't love to read, right?
Yeah.
Elizabeth, how about you?
Well, I have to say that for this book, it hit me late and slow. But I'm a huge admirer of the children's book author Marguerite Henry, whose books I read growing up, all horse books. And when I was a kid, I used to think, oh my gosh, if I don't grow up quick, Marguerite Henry will have taken all of the great stories. But she wrote a book called King of the Wind, which was one of my favorite books. And it was about a boy and an Arabian horse who went from Morocco to France. I'm like, hello, did I not realize? So I've taken to calling Fallen for France King of the Wind for grown-ups. And so she is one of my favorites. And then for Touchstone for adult authors, I just want to say I adore Abraham Verghese. And I spent 26 years working as a certified nurse midwife. And I think that I feel a real sense of of contact with him. I know that there's this thread of caregiving and the body itself that really runs through my work in addition to the horse thing. And so I would say those are the two.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Eli.
For me, my favorite novelist of all time is John Steinbeck. I just think he's just incredible at creating character and helping you understand what those characters are. My favorite book of all time is East of Eden. It's the one book that I wish I could erase my memory of having read it so I could read it again for the first time. I love David Sedaris. I'll read everything that he writes. His new book came out about a month and a half ago, and I burned through it faster than I should have instead of savoring it. But I just really enjoy the way he tells a story and makes everything funny.
Perfect. Oh, I love that you called out Steinbeck. I think he's become a little forgotten, so we need to bring him back. I love environmentally sensitive novels, and Grapes of Wrath is the kind of a foundational work. Wow, this has been so much fun. Thank you, all of you. Your wonderful presentations. They're wonderful books. Everyone's going to love them. You're going to hear from libraries. Someone in the chat mentioned that having author appearances are great for fundraisers. So yeah, keep that in mind. I hope you enjoy as your books come out. I hope you enjoy the reception. And thanks everyone for your very warm participation. We could feel your attention and your love. Check out Booklist for more reviews and Booklist readers. Thanks to Lauren. Thanks to Beth. And take care, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the summer.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so
I
much.
enjoyed it.
Bye-bye.